So when we move on to the next slide, so what have we done over the last 6 weeks? We've covered quite a bit of ground, as you can see on the slide in front of you. There are at least 14 different points that we've covered, beginning from looking at the definition of organization change, looking at the different components within the organization that are impacted by change, which is we've used the McKinsey's 7S framework to understand the different components, as well as to you know uh, see how each of them interacts with the other when any change intervention is introduced. We've also discussed why organizations change, or why should they change. uh, we've looked at what is the appropriate time at which an organization should go about any change intervention. Related to that is assessing whether an organization is ready for change. So it's one thing to desire change, uh, and another thing to make sure that the organization actually is ready and has the capacity to change. One of the important aspects of an organization is its culture, and so we spend time looking at organization culture as well, and then on organization structure, because organization structure is one of the components in the 7S framework of McKinsey. And then we spent time on individual change. So we looked at Kurt Lewin's model of individual change, and also the different responses and reactions that individuals show or exhibit when facing any kind of change event. Uh, we looked at David John Cotter's 8-step model to walk us through from the beginning to the end of a change process. Last week we looked at communication as being one of the important and critical aspects during the change process. In fact, uh, most of the work that happens during a change process is communication at every step and at various levels within the organization. And then towards the end we looked at a general sequence. Okay, so how do all these things fit in? What's the starting step, and how does it progress, and how do we end? So that was a general sequence of events we looked at uh, in a little bit of detail. And then towards the end we just introduced organization development, and we stopped over there. So what we'll do today is pick up from that last point, organization development, and you know continue with that and finish that section on OD. And then because this is our last session, we'll bring everything together. Try and make sense of all the content that we've covered over the last 6 weeks, and that we will be covering today as well over the next 30 minutes or so. And then we will wrap it up, and we'll try and finish it maybe a couple of minutes before 5:30, so that our hosts can transition and get ready for the next session. um Abhay and Arpita, do you have any questions before we continue? If you're okay,
No,
unmute yourself, so fine,
sounds
and we can
okay.
go ahead.
For
Sounds
me,
okay.
sounds okay. I missed last week's class, but I've gone through the presentation, so
Slides,
I've caught
okay.
up with the this
Very
thing.
nice, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on. So this is where we discussed OD, and one of the things about organization development is it it kind of I wouldn't want to use the word suffer, but to say, like, it seems to have the same sort of characteristic as any field or domain that is trying to seek some importance for itself, right? So in our very first session, we were talking about management fads and different management techniques or tools that have had some uh, claim to fame for a brief period of time, and then they've all either waned over time or have completely disappeared. Some have stood the test of time, and each one, because people have spent time and resources, get too wedded to a particular technique or a tool, and then present that as sort of an elixir for, or a panacea for all sorts of problems, right? And the field of OD, in my view, also seems to have the same thing. OD practitioners will swear by how OD is so fantastically different from everything else that you ever encountered in your life, and that's true for pretty much anything. Someone who has obtained a certification in executive coaching will present executive coaching as the answer for every problem in an organization. Someone who's done a Six Sigma certification will present Six Sigma as the only way to solve an organization's problem. So uh, OD also, the practitioners may have a slightly different view or a very different view from what I'm expressing right now. But if you look at the literature on organization development, you fairly quickly learn or realize that OD is one form of organization change. So everything that we've done until now will work very well, even if you're trying to use to make an OD type of intervention, right? So because you've looked at the big picture, you understand the fundamentals, the concepts, and so making an OD intervention should be fairly or relatively easy for you now. And so this definition that I've picked out for you, which is from Warner, Burke, and Bradford, is that OD is one form of organization change, and it is planned rather than unplanned, which again is the type of change that we've also discussed, right? So everything we've talked about over the last 6 weeks is about planned organization change, and not a reactive change that a company is forced to deal with because of certain circumstance. A government policy changes, and then bang, I mean, like, you have to make changes immediately. COVID-19 lockdown is announced, and then everything that you ever thought of or knew about organizations completely changes. So those are all very reactive type of changes, and not the planned change that we've been discussing uh, in this particular course. And so OD also is a planned intervention that focuses on all levels of the organization, relies primarily on the behavioral sciences. Uh, so it is more people oriented in that way. At the end of the day, it is to fuel the or progress the organization towards uh, becoming more effective. So this is the academic definition of organization development. The American Society for Training and Development, the practitioner side of OD, they have also come up with a definition that captures pretty much everything Burke and Bradford say, because the practitioners also draw their knowledge base from academia. And so the definition that we just saw now is mimicked in ASTD's definition as well, that it has to be in alignment. OD has to be in alignment with the organization's objectives. It's rooted in the behavioral sciences, long range, ongoing, stresses a process orientation to achieve results, is based on collaboration between and among people and groups, and it's a system orientation, meaning to say that it looks at the organization from the larger perspective. So you quickly will kind of realize that what this definition of OD is basically seems to be aligned with the theory O that we looked at of Nitin and Noria's why organizations change. So when we were discussing why organizations change, One of the ways to look at it, one explanation for why organizations change is that organizations can change because of economic reasons, which is theory E for economic, and theory O, which is for organizational capabilities. Right. So this is more in line with theory O. So when you have to think about, so what is the theoretical or conceptual basis for organization development? The theoretical basis is theory O from Nitin and Norya's reason for why organizations change. All right. So now, at what levels or where can you know OD interventions take place? Now, before I get to this point, the chapter that has been assigned to you from uh, this particular book, Organization Development Principles, Processes, and Performance by Gary McLean, that's just the introductory chapter to their book, right? So that particular book serves as almost like a textbook or a handbook for OD practitioners. Okay, and so if you are interested in pursuing or become more of an OD specialist rather than a general organization change management professional, I would recommend that you get your hands on that particular book. It kind of captures and it contains in one place all the information or most of the information that you will need or find useful as a practitioner. All right. So, and in that particular book, there is a lot of discussion on who an OD practitioner is and what's the difference between a practitioner, OD practitioner, and a consultant, and a whole bunch of things which I will leave it to you to read at your on your own time and understand. It's fairly easy to understand. There's nothing intellectually difficult to understand over there. So, what I will cover in OD today is just the big picture, right? So I'm trying to give you the important uh, aspects of OD. One is the definition that we've looked at and the connection with the theoretical connection, which is theory O, and the third one now is so where does or where do organization development interventions take place, right? In the definition we said uh, it is based on the behavioral sciences and it is more people focused. So meaning to say, at which level in the organization would an OD intervention be appropriate? So if you recall our discussion on organization culture, when we looked at Ed Shine's uh, three levels of organization culture, this is what we saw, right? If you recall that, the first uh, uh, top part of the iceberg is the artifacts, the things that are readily visible, what we see. What we can see in an organization are the behaviors of the people, the systems, the policies, their office infrastructure, the signages, anything that is easily visible is on the at the top level. And in the iceberg, the portion that is above the sea, the water level, is just 1/10 of the iceberg, meaning to say the next two layers contain 90% of the organization. So 90% of the organization is actually hidden from plain view of anyone, any observer. Even a lot of veterans in the organizations themselves, uh, you'll have to spend several years sometimes to get to the third or the bottommost layer, to get to the crux of the core of an organization. So yeah, so I hope you remember this. So where can OD interventions take place? OD interventions can take place at any of these three levels, meaning to say they can take place at the artifact level or what is in the visible range, two aspects in the second layer, which is the values layer, or the espoused values and the statements, or what the company says about itself, right? The companies make a lot of, they make big claims about themselves. They make these claims in their slogan, they make these claims in their advertisements, they make these claims in their annual reports, they make these claims in, a whole bunch of things that they bring out, right? So they claim that this is who we are. And then the bottommost level are the basic assumptions. So OD interventions can take place even at that core level, where uh, programs are designed and delivered to even deal with the underlying assumptions, the fundamental beliefs and values and the attitudes of people within an organization, right? So to the question, at what level or where can OD interventions take place? Answer is at every level of the organization. And we are using Ed Shine's 3 levels of organization culture to give us a visual sense of what those levels of the organization are, right? Now, uh, you remember McKinsey's 7S framework. So to tie back to what we've been looking at, OD interventions can take place at all of these 7 levels, right? So at every level, you can bring about an OD intervention. And the 7S framework is useful for you because it tells you that if I am making a change in any one component over here, I will also have to factor in its impact on other components of this particular framework, right? So I can't just change the skill set of an organization without looking at its impact on all the other or the remaining 6 components. In OD, there are two basic models, right? Two major models of organization development, and these seem to have been fairly robust over a few decades. The first one, which is the action research model, has its origins in the 1920s. So it's like almost 100 years old. And there have been modifications and alterations and improvements in the basic action research model over the last 100 years. The second model, which is the appreciative inquiry model, is of more recent vintage. Was first propounded in the mid 80s by these two guys called Cooper Ryder and Srivastava. And AAI, or appreciative inquiry, has had its share of proponents and evangelists. So we will look at these two models. Now, before I move on, let me say, I'm saying that these are the two major models. There are several other ways in which people have tried to conceptualize OD. And if you pick up any basic textbook on OD, you can read up on what else is there. In addition, there are a whole bunch of tools and techniques that are there. Again, which in and of themselves will require an entire course, right? So for this particular course that we have over a 7-week, 1.5 hours uh, program, we can only kind of look at the big picture. We are trying to look at the fundamentals so that once your fundamentals are good, you can then go ahead and make sense of the tools and techniques. All right, so let's jump into the first model, which is the action research model. Had its origins in Schuart's what is called PDCA model, or the Plan, Do, Check Act. This So let's look at this particular flow. What's this action research model trying to tell you? What it basically says is that hey, you have a something that you need to solve, a problem that you need to solve. uh, plan for it. Come up with a plan for how you will solve that problem. You put that plan into action, execute on that plan, implement that plan, and do a review. Evaluate how the plan has worked, and depending on what your lessons are, what insights you draw, then you make changes and you act on that, and then take lessons from that action to replan. So it's a kind of if everything works well, this is a nice positive, fulfilling, self-fulfilling sort of cycle, right? Over time, people have uh, you know uh, changed, or would prefer the word study instead of check, because check suddenly seems to be a little too kind of police state sort of a thing, and study is more acceptable, more a softer word to use for this particular model, right? So basic model, Schubert was the first proponent. Kurt Lewin, our friend from the individual change discussion, he has had a big hand in developing this particular model. So plan, do, check, act. And if you have done any course on adult learning, you probably have encountered David Kolb's learning cycle. Similar to that, David Kolb's learning cycle, that you have an experience, you review the thing, you draw lessons from it, and then you adapt and do some new actions. The logic is very similar to that. Now, this particular basic model has over time been improved upon by various scholars, and McLean, the author of the definition that we just looked at, uh, you know, uh, he and a couple of others put that together into what is they've called an OD process model. Right? So, uh, if you look at the right half of your screen, it tries to capture the action research process in a little more detail, right? So let me walk you through the cycle, or and then it'll start making sense. So the outer cell wall, which says, the band in white, the environment, is the environment in which the organization exists, right? So it could be the community, the society, the state, or the country, or the region in which this particular organization exists. The starting point is this entry. What this entry basically means is the entry of the OD consultant, right? So how does the OD consultant get entry into the organization? It probably comes from, like, say, the organization has put out a request, or is looking for someone to help them with certain issues that they have in their organization, and or consultants proactively or whatever go in and pitch for their for a particular business, and then the organization likes what the consultant is trying to sell, and they ask him or her to go ahead and do a project for them. So that's the entry part. At this entry part, again, a lot of the basic information about the organization and the consultant is exchanged, and they come to some arrangement on how to move forward. Startup, that is the process where there is the formal signing of the contract for undertaking the project itself. The startup phase then moves to the assessment and feedback phase, which is this is the phase where the consultant and the uh, you know gathers more information about the particular problem at hand, and tests out to see whether what is required to get the ball rolling. Assessment and feedback is then followed by action planning, which is, all right, so we have a problem, and how do we go about solving it, and what are the tools and techniques that we will use to solve this problem, how will we communicate what is the plan for communication. Everything is put together at that particular point, and then you move to the implementation phase, right? So from action planning, you move to implementation, and implementation can happen at any of these levels, at the individual level, at the team level, at a process level, global, meaning to say, at a particular, uh, either it is organization wide or multiple uh, um, geographies, community or national, at any level. It can happen at any level, implementation. So what you will see is a double-headed arrow between action planning and implementation, meaning to say that as you implement, you may have to make some adjustments or make some course corrections immediately, and your implementation informs your action planning, and then action planning leads to implementation. After that, once implementation is going on, to some extent, you evaluate, you assess progress that is being made, review, monitor, and based on the lessons learned, you either roll it out for full scale adoption, or at this point you can, depending on what lessons you draw, you can go back to any of the previous phases to make some corrections, right? So based on my evaluation, if I learn that, hey, there were some problems in my initial contract, so let me go and make that correction and run that cycle through again. uh, from evaluation, I can go back to assessment, to action planning, uh, or after evaluation I decide, well, this is not working out for us, and let's separate. So the organization breaks with the consultant, and each of them go their separate ways. So broadly, this is the uh, 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 OD process model, right? Which is similar to the general sequence of events that we looked at last week, and I'll come to that in a little bit, in a little bit, right? So let me stop over here and see if you have any questions on the action research model. If there's anything that you want me to explain, I'd be happy to do that. Or if we can move on, we can do that as well. Use the chat feature or unmute yourself. Let me know what you think.
It's clear that from my side.
You okay? All right.
Yeah.
Abhay, what are your thoughts?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay, very nice.
Okay.
All right. So this is the one of the earliest models, at least in modern organizational context. We're not talking about how it was 500, 600 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So this is the basic action research model. The second OD model, which I said is a more recent vintage, mid 80s, is appreciative inquiry. Now, what appreciative inquiry does is it flips the way that an organization's issue is framed, right? So that is what AI over here, meaning appreciative inquiry practitioners and proponents, look at. So this particular picture tries to capture that. The right half, which is, hey, look what's missing. The deficit focused view is what the AI practitioners claim is the view of the traditional action research model, which is, it is problem focused. So the ARM model or regular change frameworks start from looking at what is the problem in the organization, right? And AI proponents claim that because your starting point or the framing is from a problem perspective, over time it is a very negative outlook towards an organization, versus the appreciative inquiries framework or perspective, which is what they call asset based. Asset based meaning what are the assets of the organization? So what is the strength of the organization? What is the organization good at, great at? What has worked for the organization? What has made them successful? Let's look at those strengths and see if we can capitalize on that. Right. So the appreciative inquiry model starts its framing or perspective from what is good with this organization, and let's take it from there. So it's also called an asset based model.
Which one is more popular than you?
Well, in terms of popularity, the ARM is the more popular one simply because of its history. It's about 100 years old, versus appreciative inquiry, which is mid 80s, would make it what, about 35 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 87 was when the article came out, and so it's about 33 years old. And AI, we'll look into AI as we look at the details of AI. You'll realize what's going on, okay,
Right,
and
right.
which one you think is more popular. All right. Uh, so this is the process of appreciative inquiry. I'll walk you through what these little blurbs are talking about. You'll immediately notice that all the words, the big words, begin with a D. So the appreciative inquiry model is also called the 5D model. Um, so at the in the center, you see something called affirmative topic choice, right? So meaning to say, you use this asset based or the positive perspective to say, what is our organization good at? What are we doing really well? What are we doing really well? What has worked for us? What has made us successful? uh, what are the positives? What drives us? What has been driving our success so far? you know that is at the core of it. So you begin by define the first D, definition, which is what is it that we are trying to understand? What is the focus of inquiry? We need to clarify that, right? So it begins with the definition of we look at an example as we go along, right? So uh, uh, what is it that we are focusing on, and then go to the discovery, which is, okay, so what gives life? So what is it that has made us successful? What is the best of us as an organization? So that's where that appreciating begins, right? So the appreciative inquiries, appreciation begins from there. So you start saying, right, so let me stop a little bit over here, and then maybe tell you a quick story and then come back to this. Maybe I won't tell you a story because we are a little short of time. So let me ask you this question. How many times have you encountered people or situations where you propose a particular solution, or you make a proposal of some sort, and immediately there are people who will jump to tell you all the different reasons why that will not work, right? You come up with an idea and they'll immediately tell you it'll not work
All the time.
all the time,
Yeah.
right? Right. So that uh, is, I think, the overwhelming influence of the action research model, or the problem based, or the deficit focused thinking, where the conditioning of people's minds is such where they only look at what can go wrong as opposed to what can go right. Okay. uh, so if you know someone, like, I often have my nieces and nephews come and tell me, hey, I want to become this, fill in the blanks, whatever or like uh, earlier, I mean, back in the day, I would say, like, oh, do you think you have the capability to do it? Right. So that the way I would frame the question is a negative framing. But over time, I've kind of wizened up a little bit, and to not diss any idea they have, and to make sure that they uh, you know continue to like me as an uncle, I kind of started reframing my question as like, so how do you think we can make that work? Right. So I want to go on a trek, or I want to buy this. The question that I have now is like, so how do you think we can make it work for you? That framing, the change of framing from do you think you have the capability to do it to how do you think we can make it happen, changes the entire mindset, right? So it changes the mindset from what you don't have to what is it that you have that will help you succeed. That is exactly what appreciative inquiry is trying to do. Okay. So the discovery process is appreciating what the strengths are. The dreaming phase is, can we envision the result? Can we see the big picture? Can we see the end result? One of the examples I'd gave in a previous session when we were talking about uh, gap analysis and all that was to say you have to envision the future. You have to envision the future. So like a builder or a developer showing you a fully built model, right? So oftentimes you'll have someone who has a model apartment ready for you to go and visit, so that you know how the entrance is, where the sofa will be, where the TV will be, kitchen, bathroom, whatever, right? uh, some actually build the model and show you. uh, Others will have a toy or a scale model. Others will have a visual walkthrough, a 3D, maybe a virtual reality experience they might give you. Anything to help you visualize the end result. Okay. uh, that is the third phase of dreaming. And then design. So this is where uh, AI, appreciative inquiry, has a slightly different flavor than the action research model. In the action research model, because the consultant is brought from outside, there is a tendency to see the consultant as a subject matter expert who will come with solutions, right? In the appreciative inquiry model, the design phase is co-construction. The design phase is co-construction, meaning to say that both the consultant who acts as a facilitator and people in the organization work together to create the design. So that is what co-construction or co-creating means. They come up with solutions together, and then destiny is like, okay, so how do we empower people to act on our designs, and then learn from the implementation and making adjustment and sustaining whatever change that we want in the organization, right? So this is the AI process, the 5D process of appreciative inquiry. Let me slow down, or let me pause and take any questions you have.
Yeah, the last one, design to destiny, if you can please explain once more.
Okay, so let me begin from definition itself. We define what it is that is our focus of inquiry, right? You notice that how I'm trying to avoid using the word problem. Okay, I'm not saying let us focus on what the problem is. I'm saying what is it that we want to inquire, what is it that we want to learn more about, know more about.
Right.
Once we've decided on that, we go to the next stage of discovery, which is like, so what are our strengths? Okay, what are our strengths? What's been our this one for success, mantra for success? And then dreaming, the end result. And then design is where we work with the consultant and people in the organization work together to come up with a design jointly. They come to the design happens together, right? In a collaborative manner. Once the design is in place, then the design is implemented, right? The plan is implemented. Destiny basically is comprises the entire all the sub processes of implementation, evaluation, and adjustment. Right? It has all three of it. Basically, I think the guys who Cooper Ryder and Srivastav, they want, because they started off with D, they needed to kind of have, destiny over there to capture all of that, because to having to say implementation, evaluation, and adjustment seems to be a little more bothersome than just saying destiny. We'll maybe it'll make sense as we move on. Okay. All right. So just a quick thing about appreciative inquiry in terms of uh, the process, right? So now, appreciative inquiry has its evangelists. In fact, if you do a search for appreciative inquiry, there is uh, organizations, including the one that Cooper Ryder, runs. I think it's called AI Commons or something like that. And you will see that they say they offer you certification courses, and so you become an AI trained practitioner, and that training itself is longer than this entire course that we are right now doing, which is like what, 7 sessions into 1.5 hours. That's about 10.5 hours in all, right? So that is all we are spending on this particular program, or this course. That appreciative inquiry certificate itself is of a much longer duration than that. Okay. So this appreciative inquiry, their theoretical basis, or what is the knowledge that is giving them strength, is that it is based on what is called a social constructivism, or social constructivist perspective. Social construction basically means that uh, the world that we live in is created by the people who are in it, right? So for example, like say you have a 10 rupee note with you. What is that 10 rupee note? The 10 rupee note is a symbolic representation of everyone in India agreeing that that piece of paper that you have is worth something, and that something is 10 units, 10 rupees. So 1.3 billion people plus a whole bunch of foreigners socially agree to give value to this piece of paper. Does it make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that is what social construction means. In fact, if you talk to social constructivists, they will say like pretty much everything, not pretty much everything, everything is socially constructed. Because we agree on certain things, it exists. Nothing has its own independent existence, right? So, for example, we say the sun rises in the east. That is what we all agree on. The sun does not know that it rises from the east. Does it make sense? For someone in Mars, they could probably call it the sun rises from the north,
True,
or
true.
whatever their word for the north is.
It's
But if
our
every
perspective.
it's
That's
perspective, right? So it's a socially constructed thing, and that is what appreciative inquiry builds on. So if we focus on what our strengths are, it begins a positive cycle within in trying to look at our organization's progress. Okay, so there are a whole bunch of principles. I'm not going to go into all of the details of it. I just put this particular slide up uh, to give you a sense of uh, uh, where what AI talks about, and to encourage you to go and do some additional research, right? So I've given you the big picture of AI, Now it is for you to take this and uh, do some independent research to see whether this particular thing works for you. Okay, so let me go back to the question that Arpita asked: which is more popular? ARM is more popular simply because it's been there for a longer time. ARM is more popular. AI has its share of fans, mostly I would say in the development sector. In the more in the more for-profit or corporate sector, um, I am not too sure it has many buyers, simply because one, uh, there's not a lot of research on its efficacy, and also the process is time consuming. It is more time consuming than the ARM model, which itself has its own problems, in the sense that because it has all these different stages, uh, the critics will say, like, the world is changing so fast, we cannot go through these 10 different steps, come up with something else. But unfortunately, if you want to engage in any planned change activity or planned development activity, you have to go through the process. That is the only way it will work well. Trying to short change any of the steps kind of usually leads to a lot of rework. Anytime someone is taking a shortcut, you realize fairly quickly that undoing mistakes and redoing them is much more expensive than following the process in the first place, right? um, so this is all I want to say about appreciative inquiry. Do you have any questions? Is there anything that of a fundamental or conceptual nature you want to ask me about appreciative inquiry?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. So when we are talking about OD, we are saying uh, it's one part of or one type of organization change, and it's based in the behavioral sciences, is more people focused, and its theoretical basis is the theory of war, that is, it seeks to build organization capabilities. uh, and there are two major models. One is the action research model, and the second one is the appreciative inquiry model. Both these models have their advantages or their benefits, and they also have their limitations, right? So one can see how in a world that only seems to be focused on problems, it's sometimes good to kind of look at what is positive. So you will often, maybe you've attended a workshop, or you've sat through some session where you're asked to just not focus on the negative. uh, just tell one positive character or quality of one of your colleagues, right? So uh, you pick the worst person in your team and force yourself to think of something positive about them, right? And that is the idea that appreciative inquiry tries to embody, which is to see the positive, or the strengths, or the resource, the asset, that is a the resource that is an asset in your team, or your department, or your organization. All right. So with that, uh, having covered quite a bit, let's see if we can bring everything together. We have about 20 minutes to go. Uh, can we bring everything together? Just step back a little bit and say, you get back to work on Monday, and the head of your company calls you and says, uh, "Hey, I want you to work on this particular project. We need to make some changes in the organization, and this is what I want you to do." It can be anything. Now you have to sit back and say, so where do I begin to go about dealing with this project that my CEO has just thrown on my lap? Okay, so we begin first of all by asking this question: what is the necessity, or what is going to drive this change that the CEO is asking me, right? And for that, I'm looking at theory E, theory O, and that discussion about adversity, about learning, that we had in session 2 of this particular course, right? So we ask a fundamental question: why do we need to do this change? And if we have to do this change, what is driving it? So, say for example, COVID-19 has uh, drastically change the paradigm or the way in which people and organizations start looking at themselves. And in order to build organization resilience or capacity, you have to do certain things so that the next time there is a lockdown or a pandemic or a catastrophe or a disaster, your organization is well and ready to deal with it. Right. So the first thing is, what is the necessity? Second is it the appropriate time to change? If the first question is, what is the why do I need to change? Then I say, is it a good time to change, or is it the right time to change? Is it the appropriate time? So, if you remember the corporate cholesterol test tool that we looked at again in session 2, right? Go back to it, check if this is a good time for you. Is the organization ready? Well, it's my CEO is telling me that we need to change, and we did this quick cholesterol test, and we've determined yes, it's a good time to change as well. But is the organization ready? Does the organization have the capacity, the resources? And for this, we go back to our discussion on the readiness to change discussion that we've had. And the hint is over there, the David Gleicher's formula, that for change to take place, your what are the things that have to be in place? That there has to be dissatisfaction with or the status quo. There should be a clear vision that needs to be in place, and also that the first steps for making that change happen should be in place, and the product of these three factors should be greater than the cost of change or the resistance that you will face in the organization. Once the product is higher, you know that the organization is ready to change. It has the capacity to make the change. Number four, sorry, number four is so what is the desired state? Can we clarify what is it that we want? Going back to our AI discussion on vision, so what does the end look like? And do a gap analysis with the current state. So if I need to go from here to Johannesburg, if that is my end state, what is the gap between me and Johannesburg? You guys have to travel from Delhi, I have to travel from Bangalore. What is the gap that I have to bridge? Similarly, for your particular change initiative, what is the gap you have to bridge? And what are the components that you will have to change in the organization? And for this, we look at the 7S framework. Okay. So all of this, answering all of these questions give you information that you will find useful to inform your next steps. All right. So if this is my end state, this is the gap that needs to be bridged, and these are the components in the organization that will change, I need to also ask, what is the outcomes that I'm expecting, right? So what are the outcomes I'm expecting at the individual level, at the group level, at the organization level? You at this time you should recall the discussion on behaviors, what cognition and attitudes, right? So when we talked about change, especially at the individual level, we said it's easier to change behaviors first. The next level of difficulty is changing what they know, and the third level is changing attitudes or perspectives, right? So that is our next level. Next question is, who will lead or manage the change initiative? You know, you need to put a change management team in place, someone who will be the sponsor, someone who will be the champion, someone who will be the coordinator, someone who will fight for resources within the organization, someone who will ensure that all the requisite buy-ins are secured, at least from the top management. So one of the critical things about the change management team is that there should be involvement of the top management, particularly the CEO or whoever, right? The head of the institution, organization should be seen to be involved. That is what will inspire people to, make sacrifices or make changes. It cannot be that the top person is completely, divorced from what is going on, and people don't see the top person as a visible entity, in the change process. If they don't see that, it's unlikely that they will change or make any effort. Uh, Also, it's good if uh, a line manager or line leader is the head of this team or is a significant player, rather than just having the HR person do it. Uh, More for political reasons, because if most of your people who have to undergo this change are on the line side of the business, it's always good to have the line leader telling them what to do rather than HR telling them what to do. Next question is your action planning, the plans to deal with resistance, communication strategy, and action. Right. So we've discussed all of these things in the previous session when we looked at the general sequence of events. Then you uh, execute, implement your plans, review, evaluate the results of the implementation, and make adjustments. Make adjustments and go back to any previous step in order to make that particular adjustment, right? So these 11 points should help you wrap your head around any change initiative, right? So uh, there was one question one of you asked, and fortunately that person is not here today in our session, uh, about wow, each of these steps uh, is seems to be like a project in itself, sort of thing. Uh, the answer is yes. Every one of the steps in this slide, as well as the slide on the general sequence of events that we discussed last week, uh, requires a lot of homework to be done. You cannot engage in a change initiative without adequate preparation. In fact, the classic thing about any sort of project like this is the importance of three P's: preparation, preparation, and preparation. So you have to be prepared. You have to be able to foresee challenges that you might face. You might have to, work through a whole lot of things. You have to put responses in place before you make the announcement that you're going to make a particular change. You cannot make an announcement of change without being very clear about what it is that you're doing, because once people in your organization start getting the sense that you're not adequately prepared or you don't have the answers, they start kind of it becomes difficult for you to get buy-in. it's okay that if you don't have answers, as long as you can tell them that you at least thought about it and you don't know the answer, as opposed to finding yourself uh, in a position where, like, even the question seems like it's coming for the first time. All right. So this is the entire program, the course that we've done on one slide. Okay, so let me stop over here and take any questions you have. If there's something you need clarified, I'd be happy to do that.
The steps have been very clear, Ted. Even all the classes I've attended, most of it. Uh, the steps have been very detailed. I'm in fact looking forward to incorporating this in the coming year in certain new projects which we are working in the organization. And I mean, I have your email ID. I would love to share what comes out of it. I will definitely try it out. It looks
Sure,
very
I'd be happy
interesting.
to. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll just put my email in the chat
Yeah.
box. So just hang on. Let me see.
Because I remember we had organization wide, we had undergone a huge change in our processes end to
Okay.
end due to certain software changes. And I mean, we had to execute it in 2020 and we prepared way back from 17. And quite a few of these steps had been taken care of, but yes, it can be refined further. So I'm really eager to go through it again and what maybe look at what we may have missed out, although it was a successful project. But I would want to match that to this, and as a learning.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Uh, so one thing that I would want to add over here is so last week we had this discussion about models and frameworks,
Yeah.
and one of the cautionary sort of points that I had made was that the model and the framework is only meant to serve as a guide. Okay.
Right.
And we have to be careful about not getting too wedded to the model, to say
Mm,
like, hey, I
mm,
need to do everything over there. you know in the beginning, maybe yes, but with experience you will learn that you can make a lot of adjustments, right?
right.
Like, say for example, when you first start cooking a particular something, you closely follow the recipe, right?
Mm,
You measure everything according to the recipe. If it says 1 tablespoon, you're making sure that it's not a heaped tablespoon, and it's just a you cut off the head of the heap to make sure it's exactly 1 tablespoon. By the
right.
time you've done it for the 10th time, you don't even look at the recipe, right? So you make
Right.
adjustments, and if
Mm,
something goes wrong, you know immediately what you can do to make corrections, right?
right.
So you put too much salt, okay, fine, I cut a couple of potatoes and put it in it, and then the salt will kind of, saltiness will come down a little bit, whatever. I'm not a great cook. I only know that because
Mhm.
I often keep putting too much salt and I have to put potatoes in everything. uh, so you get the point, right? So
Right. Right.
use the framework or a model as a guide. uh, all frameworks and all models have limitations. We have to recognize
Mm,
that.
mm.
uh, uh, and yeah, that's good. Okay, Abhay, any questions?
No, sir, it's okay.
All right. Okay, so all right, with this, let me kind of leave you with uh, this particular quote from Gordon Moore. This guy was the founder chairman of Intel, also famous for his Moore's law. If you recall Moore's law, back in the day, he said that computing speeds would double every 18 months. That was his prediction. Now computing speeds have far exceeded his uh, prediction. They double faster than 18 months, and in more exponential at more exponential rates. uh, his point basically being that because everything keeps changing so rapidly, especially technology, the field that he was in, uh, his view is that what is going to help you is if you know your fundamentals. because if you know the fundamentals, then you can make your own tools. You don't have to be too worried about it, because you understand what is happening. So in this particular course, what I've tried to do, and I spent quite a bit of time on that, is to uh, focus on why, what, when, who, where, those kind of questions, so that we understand what organization change is all about. Once we understand that, then everything else just becomes a question of tinkering. So if uh, again, to use a cooking recipe, you have a spice box which has 20 different spices. Once you understand what each of those spices is, and what it can do, and what it is capable of, then you can do wonders with it. Suddenly you throw in a spice which nobody has ever mixed together, and you have a completely different flavor which blows people's minds off, right? So uh, uh, but for that, you need to understand what each spice will do. And similarly, for our organization change, if we know the fundamentals, then developing tools and techniques to deal with issues that crop up during the change process becomes a lot more easier. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all I have for the course. I would like to thank all of you, especially Abhay and Arpita, for joining us today. Have a strange feeling, or this one, that the other participants probably will log in at 6 o'clock, and I'm sure our hosts Arun and Alok will let them know or deal with them. In any case, this is being recorded, so they will have access to the content, at least,
Yeah.
even afterwards. All right, so with that, let me say thank you very much, folks. We still have another 10 minutes, so I think we can wrap up. But if you have any questions, generally, not just today's content, but any question in the whole program so far, please feel free to let me know. And we have a few minutes. I'd be happy to address them.
I'm pretty clear, Ted.
You're
Thank you
good?
so much.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right.
And I make, of course, come back if I have more queries later, but definitely it's
Yeah,
been a great,
absolutely. I have
yeah.
posted my email address.
Yeah,
So,
I've noted that. Yeah.
learning is not doesn't end,
Yeah.
over here.
In fact,
So,
OT is so much in demand. I know quite a few students are thinking of learning more on this even after ISTD. But
yeah.
it's been a good fundamental, like you said, for all of us to set.
Right. I mean, it is a little,
Yeah.
it would be too presumptuous to say that, a 10.5 hour program will make you a specialist, right?
Hmm.
So it's a little too ambitious and presumptuous. We have to be realistic about it. The design is such that to expose you to the fundamentals, and then at least frame your thinking in a way where you know what kind of questions you need to be asking the next time you're on Google. When you're searching for something, you at least need to know, what kind of questions I need to be, what is my search string going to look like. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So with that, let's say, let's wrap it up, and let me wish all of you good luck. I'd like to say a special thanks to our support personnel, Arun and Alok, sitting in Delhi. Thank you so much for patiently, being with us for this entire 7 sessions. Thank you so much, and I look forward to, maybe seeing you guys at some point if our
Yeah,
paths cross. Yeah.
definitely. Thank
Okay.
you so much. And
Uh,
wish you and the team, of course, a very happy new year.
yes, yes,
And a
absolutely,
healthy new
absolutely.
year, most importantly. Yeah.
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 Happy New Year, folks. Also,
Thank
take
you.
care.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Alok. Thank you, Arun. And wish you all Happy New Year. Bye bye.
Thanks.